Recording has started. I'd like to welcome everybody today. My name is Linda Bartram. I'm the National First Vice President of AEBC and the Chair of the Training and Technology Committee. And this event today is being brought to you on behalf of that committee. I'd like to welcome you to our Advocacy Roundup, which we hope will become an annual event where we will share the advocacy activities that the organization has pursued over the last year and talk about where we might be going in the next year. Advocacy is the main objective or one of our main activities as an organization, and we feel it's very important that all of our members are aware of what we are doing at a national level and to take direction from the membership through events such as this. I'm asking Richard if you would mute everyone now, and we'll keep everyone muted, and the way we're going to run the event today is to, oops, and I'm going to have to unmute myself too.
Well, no, I haven't muted you yet. I was waiting until you finished your instructions, and I was going to wait till you're done. Sorry.
Okay.
That would be
All
useful.
Right. Okay. So as soon as I'm finished talking, Rich is going to mute everybody, but the way we'll run the event, structure it today is Dean and Hilton I'll introduce them in a moment, but they will be presenting. And after they are going to present 3 different advocacy activities that have happened over the past year. And after each presentation, they'll open the floor for questions and comments and possibly a little discussion. We will hopefully be able to do this within an hour. We have capacity to go a little longer if the discussion gets very animated and we want to carry on, but we're trying to keep it within an hour. And okay, Richard, I will get you to mute everyone, and I'll be back in a second.
Okay, so Linda,
yes,
Hilton, and Dean, if you unmute yourselves, and you can continue your presentation.
Okay, so I'd just like to first of all do a quick land recognition. I am presenting this morning and joining you this morning on Zoom from Victoria, and this is the traditional lands of the Lekwungen speaking peoples. And I'd just like us all to take a moment to just silently recognize and remember the territories on which we live, work, and play from all across this country. And also to just remind ourselves of our commitment as individuals and as an organization to reconciliation. Okay. I'd like to introduce Dean Steacy, who is the chair of our advocacy committee, and Hilton Schwartz, who is a member of the advocacy committee, who will be doing the presentation today. Take it away, Dean and Hilton.
Okay, thank you, Linda. Hi, everyone. I'm glad that you could join us. So quickly, as Linda pointed out, we're going to deal with 3 types of advocacy today. We've broken them down into individual, group, and then legislative, and we'll get into each one of those as they come on. Using those 3 terminologies because they're the easiest to use. They're not necessarily scientific, and there's lots of other types of pieces of advocacy, but for me, in my experience, I've always found that advocacy falls into those 3 areas. So we'll start. First, I'm just going to ask Lee to jump in and because he's going to read the list of sort of what we've done as AEBC in advocacy over the last year or so. So Lee?
Thanks, Dean. What I want to do is just do a quick summary of what looks like about 30 different items that AEBC has addressed this year. Some of the work was done by our chapters. Most of the work that we have listed here was done specifically by the Advocacy Committee and the Board of Directors. There are several things that we worked on with the federal government, and I'll speak to that first. We created a disability response to the 2024 budget, made some recommendations to the Department of Transportation, specifically around air accessibility, and attended a summit on that. We spoke quite a lot about the Canada Disability Benefit and the Accessible Canada Roadmap, and made some really good inroads with the Senate, specifically on the National Eye Care Strategy, which was unanimously passed by Parliament just earlier this year. In addition, we worked on some Ontario government responses. They asked us for some advice regarding the Ontario design of public spaces and the built environment, as well as some areas more on parks. We also worked with a few different Accessibility Standards Committee work on accessibility in the Emergency Measures Act, for communication and technology, around plain language standard, as well as a few other issues. We again worked with the CRTC, Diversity Review and Focus Group, and there's another one coming up in January. We made some submissions around described video, and we also worked with a couple of our partners in the group on multi-use pathways, consumer advocacy group, specifically is what I'm talking about, and made a few other outreaches on self-service kiosks. Cycling and bus stops was something that the advocacy group really had a push on, right from BC through to Halifax. There were a lot of issues around floating bus stops, as well as the cycling infrastructure program here in Ontario. So those are, without getting into some of the long and governmental names for things, what we've been working on, as well as addressing issues when they're brought up by our members. So thank you.
Okay, so as you can see from what Lee has mentioned, we've been, as an organization, quite busy, and I think it's quite good that we're quite busy, and that's what we would like as a group, to maintain being busy. So before I get into anything, though, I just thought, for those of you who don't know me, I would give you a little bit of background about myself. I'm a retired civil servant, and have worked for the federal government for over 40 years. But aside from that, I've been advocating for myself and for different things since I was about 6 years old. So, and when I say that, I'm not saying that to just say, oh, I've been, that's been going on, but I was born with a genetic disorder, and as a child, I had to learn how to negotiate to do things, because when I was in school or trying to do activities, I had people saying, no, you can't do that because you're disabled. So I learned to advocate for myself. So I've been doing it for a long time. Sometimes I've been successful, sometimes I haven't. But that's part of advocacy. So getting into the first piece, and the reason I've mentioned this is the first piece that I wanted to talk about, was self-advocacy, or advocating as an individual. And that's probably the most common type of advocacy that we as a group, or as a person, will do. And that type of advocacy can run from the really complicated issues like Linda's done and other people have done on floating bus stops and bicycle paths and different things like that. But it also runs to easy things such as going into a grocery store and trying to get someone to help make sure that you can get your groceries in an accommodated manner. So the scope of self-advocacy, as you can see, runs a long way. I'm going to let Hilton jump in here now so he can provide a bit of about himself and give a couple of examples of self-advocacy that he's done.
Thanks, Dean. Hi, everybody. It's my name's Hilton Schwartz. I'm the National Board Director. A little bit about myself. I've had a few careers. It's been more like work, retire, repeat. I lost my vision several years ago, and so advocacy became this part of my life and my career, although I've been advocating all my life, but it was called different things and worked in different ways for sure. So the kind of self-advocacy I do is sort of got like a foot in two camps, because a lot of the work I do is to be on different federal agencies. So the Canadian Standards Agency or Accessible Standards Canada, or an agency for kiosks, advocating for being able to use it as a person who has no vision. So when I serve on those committees, you're not allowed to represent yourself as somebody from an organization. You have to say, well, I'm just representing myself. I represent, the disability community in some way. But at the same time, of course, I take all my information and knowledge and motivation from our entire alliance, from the advocacy committee, and I'm always, although a lot of these things are confidential, I'm always able to ask the advocacy committee, or sometimes one-on-one conversations, this is something we're discussing, give me some ideas, give me some feedback. So I try to very, very subtly, keep everybody in the loop and all the information I can. I think the most interesting one I've done recently are self-service kiosks. So these are the machines that you arrive at, whether it's the bank machine where you want to get some cash or do a deposit or do some transactions, or you go to the grocery store and you have to check out, or you go to McDonald's and you want to order something, or you go to the hospital and there's a machine where you have to register. And the question is, how can you make sure those things work for us? Even how can we find them in the first place? So I worked on a committee at the Canadian Standards Agency to create a standard for this. It's not a mandatory standard, but we went through a lot of things. The most important thing I think that came out of it is that a lot of standards have like, this dimension has to be this and this dimension has to be that. But in this case, we went like up one level, and we said that the self-service kiosk has to be useful. So it means that, as a person with a disability, I have to be able to approach it the same way as a person without a disability, get things done, and leave with a smile. So that's a big field, usability, for sure, and it's something we're just starting to explore. So that's just one of the things I've done, in some depth, but I've been on several committees. We're just starting one now for procurement. So if the federal government wants to create a contract to buy something, what should be in the contract about a person with disability being able to use whatever it is we are buying? So yeah, that's my little blurb. Back to Dean.
Okay. Thank you, Hilton. So as you can hear, there's lots of different ways to self-advocate, but I think what I'd like to touch or continue to touch on is that as an individual, when you come across an item and you know that something needs to be fixed, and it can be just for yourself or it can be for a community of individuals, but it's something you want to tackle. I think what you have to do is make sure that as a person, if you're doing this on your own, you understand your issue and be willing to take your issue to whomever. It could be a company, it could be a store, it could be the bank. and you go in and ask. And I think one of the things I would always say about AEBC, at least since the time I've been in the advocacy committee and part of AEBC, is that we've always been there to help. So if somebody, you've got an issue with, I'm just going to make something up. You got an issue with Canada Post, and you can't get into your Canada Post area because they don't have Braille or access to the Braille, and you need some signage, or the wayfinding piece doesn't work. You know, you should feel that you have the right to go and address that. Now, let's assume you try and address it and you're not being too successful. Come to us. We'll help. We have helped. We supported members on many different occasions when they've had issues to, move things forward. But it's always important that if you've started something, and you should maintain the control of it. And as I said, AEBC is there to help. So I'm going to open the floor to questions, because it may be easier to answer your questions than for me to drone on about the topic. If you have a question, please raise your hand, and I'll ask Richard to let us know who's there.
So far, no hands. So to raise your hand, it's Alt Y on the PC, Option Y on a Mac, and on the phone, it's *9. And to unmute yourself, it's Alt A on the PC. It's somewhere on the controls of an iPhone if you're in the Zoom client, and on the phone, it's *6 to unmute yourself.
So, Dean, it's Linda.
Yeah. Hi, Linda.
Hi. Not specifically on self advocacy, but going back to the list that Lee read out, can we speak to some of that at this point, or are you going to address those in a later part of this discussion?
I was going to address the bigger pieces of those later on in
I'll
the other groups.
I'll leave my question till later. Thank you.
Okay. All right.
So far, no hands. If anyone has any questions, maybe you can just unmute yourself and ask. There's no hands. If not, then I would probably suggest Dean and Hilton, you could probably move on to your next topic.
Okay, so just getting the one final thing I would say about self-advocacy is that if you have an issue and you want to talk offline, feel free to reach out to us and the advocacy committee, and we can contact you and give you whatever assistance or guidance, advice that you want. Okay, so the next piece is,
we do have one raised hand, so go ahead.
Okay.
Ian, I think it is.
Hi, everybody. I wanted to follow up on when Lee was walking through the list regarding Bill C-284 and AEBC's position with respect to consultation on building the regulations for C-284. We've got about 18 months to get to the government and help them figure out how to give that bill some teeth. And I was just curious where AEBC is on that.
Well, when we put in pieces on any bill, I'm not going to just put it on 284, but on any bill from when we were doing Accessible Canada Act through to the last one on iCare, and when we've done the piece on to this presentation to the Senate on the Disability Benefit Act, we come up with a position, and usually what will happen is the Advocacy Committee will, as a group, go through what's there, and most of the times we'll split the bills up, their pieces of bills up, because they're quite long, and then we look at those, and everybody comes back with ideas or opinions about what we think is missing or what we think is should be changed, and or you know, sometimes it's just wordsmithing, but we try not to go there. Then we, as a group, will come to a consensus as to what we believe, let's say, is needs to be changed or is missing. We will then write a letter to the sponsor of the bill. Usually there's depending on which bill it is, there's a House of Commons committee that information has to go to. So we will send that off, and 99% of the time when we send this off, we're also asking to be able to present our opinion or present before the House committee and the Senate committee. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. We've been lucky in the last few pieces that we've submitted that we have been asked to present. We have done similar things where we put pieces together and submissions on standards, and we put those in hoping that they'll go in and that the standards will be people, the committee that is reviewing the standards will listen to what we've written and implement it. And we've had some success with that on a couple of the standards. Pieces have been put in that we felt were missing, and they've added to it. But getting to the specific thing that you're asking in is that once you put in a submission, you don't know where it's actually going to end up, if stuff is going to get changed or not. For example, I did a submission just recently to the House Committee on the Elections Act and made a presentation. We had like 20 minutes to make a presentation, and we're asked questions by the committee members to the House, and they take the information and you go away hoping that they've heard you. And the only way you're going to know really whether or not it's been done, and this would be what I would say for any piece of act, is if you see once the legislation, it moves through the different steps, if the legislation has changed. So if it hasn't, there's usually an opportunity to maybe make another representation to the Senate and ask the Senate to look at it. But there's no guarantee that, you know, any group, an AEBC or you as an individual, if you put in a submission, you're putting in the submission because you have the right to express your opinion about that act. You don't know until the act is actually passed whether or not what you asked for or what you've said has been taken into account. I don't know if that
I'll
answered
just
your question.
I'll just add something here, Dean. Hi, Ian. It's Linda. I was one of
Hi,
the ones
Linda.
I was one of the ones who presented to the Senate on this
Yeah,
bill.
and
this
I
is,
thought you guys had some really great points to bring to that.
yeah. This is, for the sake of our members who may not know what that number stands for, this is the National Eye Care Strategy Act. And we did talk about how we were going to monitor things over the next little while and see where we would fit into being a part of, you know, development of regulations, etc. And I think I'd like to defer to Lee, who has been looking into how we can do this in the next little while. So Lee, maybe you can give us an update on that.
Can you update specifically on what again, Linda?
This is the National Eye Care Strategy.
Right. Okay.
And we spoke about being able to monitor, you know, progress and regulations and when they're being formed and making sure that we're on top of it. We did not we came into the National Eye Care Strategy issue quite late in the day. We hadn't been involved up until that point, and we felt we possibly should have been earlier. And so we're trying to keep on top of it. So Lee, what are we, what have we, where are we at with that?
Well, yeah, the strategy has been passed. There are many other eye loss, vision related organizations that are really pushing for this and are a part of it. It is a healthcare strategy, much like the dental care strategy and the pharmacare strategy that have been put through, and it was designed upon those standards. Now, what we're going to try and do is to be a part of the session in terms of the implementation once it gets started, which is going to supposedly be in the spring, around some of the healthcare reforms that are happening. And what was going to happen is they're supposed to be reaching out to the organizations that have been a part of it, and we can speak to some of the issues around when someone is losing their vision and needs some different therapies that aren't medically related, that an optometrist or an ophthalmologist won't be able to take care of. And so that lived experience, peer-to-peer support is something we'll be looking at, and we want to make sure that that the eye care strategy doesn't leave behind people who become blind. Basically is what we're going to try and do. There hasn't been anything in the news recently around it, and the actual implementation of the strategy hasn't begun from what our research can tell us.
So does that answer your question, Ian?
Yeah, I think
We'll stay in touch.
for the sake of this, yeah, I would love that actually.
Yeah.
Because I think there are essentially 4 major chunks to the strategy. There's prevention through early detection. There's advancing existing treatments in a more timely fashion. There's funding research for new therapies and treatments. And there's also a whole rehab function that I think was one of the things that either Lee or Linda, you addressed in your presentation to the Senate committee. Which has to do with defining what rehabilitation actually is and what its constituent parts are and how to move those pieces forward on the board. So I think there's a lot that we could have influence on and should have influence on. So I'm just really curious to see where everybody's at on the field of battle.
Yeah, and that's where I believe we intend to go,
Right.
as well as making sure that, you know, we're part of this discussion. The bill was not clear to make sure that, you know, who are the stakeholders. And we want to make sure that stakeholders are persons with lived experience of vision loss, not just ophthalmologists and health professionals. And so we'll be monitoring that. And Ian is with, for those of you who perhaps don't know, Ian is with CCB, who presented at the Senate as well. And so this is one partnership that we will be moving forward on and looking at this particular bill and the regulations together.
Okay.
Thanks,
So
guys.
thank you for the question, Ian, and thank you for helping out. So the next piece I'm going to move on to is group advocacy, and as the name implies, it's you know, usually done by a group, and this is where the advocacy committee, in my mind, shines, because we get suggestions from members on pieces that we, you know, can you do this or can you look into that, and we will do that, and we'll go out. And I think there's been over the last couple of years, we've sent questions out to the members about, are you interested in looking at this subject matter, this type of advocacy? And there's been, Hilton can back me up on this, and that, when we get into these meetings on the group advocacy and we've got a topic, the floor is always open for frank discussion, because there's always different pieces that have to be looked at and in the group negotiated and gone through. And where the group advocacy has really played a heavy part in my mind is that when we were reviewing the standards that are coming out from the ACA and different places like built environment and IT and travel and those things, these standards that come in, they're long, and sometimes they're a good cure for insomnia, but they have to be read and they have to be looked at, and we've broken them up, and as a group then we come together and put together the submission, and then we go through that submission, and usually it's by consensus. We figure out what should be added or what shouldn't be added, and there's times where I might want something, but everybody else says no, that's not a good idea. Or as Hilton can attest to, he'll put something forward and the group will say, well, no. And then, but at the end of the day, once we put the submission in, it's a group submission. Everybody has come to a consensus about that issue. And there's been times where we've selected topics or items and we're not always absolutely sure that it's what the membership will want, but we go ahead with it anyways in hopes that we can achieve something. We've had some success with our submissions to the standards. We've had some group submissions that we've made to banks and to other organizations where I would say proudly that we're punching above our weight in the responses that we get back from corporations, and they're willing to look at, or at least be in communications with us to see what we can move forward. So, and maybe this will answer your question a bit, Linda, is that in that list of what Lee wrote out, there's quite a bit of group advocacy that overlaps the group piece, but also runs into the next topic area, which is the legislative area. So as a group, we're doing both. We're doing the sort of the commercial side of it as a group, and then we're also putting together submissions to standards and to legislation as AEBC as a group. And do you have anything to add to that, Hilton?
Yeah, I would like to add that this is actually a lot of fun. I enjoy it a lot. It's a lot of work for sure. But just to get a little bit into the nuts and bolts, the government will publish a draft regulation. It might be 5 or 10 chapters, maybe 1,000 or 2,000 words. And then they ask you that if you have any comments or suggestions about any particular word or paragraph or sentence or whole chapter, how would you write it? What would be the change that you make? And so that's where we have these such interesting discussions at the Advocacy Committee as to, how far do we want to make our suggestions practical? How much do we want to make them aspirational? How much do we want to make them, let's just start a conversation and see what happens? And then there's always the undertone like, okay, so we're making these suggestions, us and 200 of our other advocacy organizations. How much of an impact will we really have when we finally see the regulations come out? Will there be a word, a phrase, a paragraph that we can literally say, yep, that was us? like pat ourselves on the back. And sometimes, sadly, it doesn't seem like we had any effect at all. But that never stops us from putting our best foot forward and working a lot on these things and circulating sometimes 3 or 4 or 5 drafts. Everybody takes a crack at it. We're not wordsmithing. We're really talking about the principles of advocacy. What's best for us? What does it mean in terms of, yeah, when I go to an auditorium, I want there to be, you know, a wide aisle or braille or a washroom where I can find the toilet or be able to enjoy it or hear it, and bring those actual practical experiences to the regulations. And I mean, even when they're published, it's not like cast in concrete. Most regulations, they come up for review every 5 years, and they're always open for suggestions. So it's an ongoing process. So it's really something that I'm enjoying a lot. I'm certainly enjoying working with the advocacy committee. We've done several of them since, I guess, 2022 when we started doing it. We've done about 5 or 6 or 7 of them, and it's just been great.
Okay, so Linda, you had a specific question concerning that,
Well,
or?
I did because
Okay.
I'd like to sort of, can you give us an example of something that maybe wasn't worked on this year, because I know these things take time to see the results of advocacy efforts, but something that either you've worked on this year and you've seen some positive results and some specifics, or something that was perhaps worked on in 2022 or 2023, and we're now seeing the fruits of your labor. So can you give us some specific
Sure.
achievements?
So I'm going to go from sort of easy, small to a little bit more concrete, complicated, isn't it? A while ago, we had some issue with a couple of the banks in getting our cards being tactile or identifiable. And we had meetings with several of the major 6 banks, and we were successful. Royal Bank now has tactile markers that you can request on your credit card and on your client card. I believe the same goes for CIBC and TD. Scotiabank, we're still negotiating with them, or they're doing what they're doing to figure it out. But it all starts with a conversation with them, and we are moving through that. The other piece that is a little bit bigger is that we started out as part of a group with the CNIB, CCB, and Diabetes Canada on going to Health Canada and the insulin pump manufacturers, because none of the insulin pumps are accessible or usable by a person who's blind. And we had meetings with Health Canada and the specific unit that deals with this to alert them to the issue. And we found out through consultation with them that any manufacturer who is manufacturing pretty much any healthcare device, if it's not accessible to the blind, they only have to put a label on it saying that it is not accessible to the blind, and the company doesn't really have to do anything. Well, we went back to them and said, this is unreasonable. It's not safe. You're putting the lives of blind diabetics on the line. And Health Canada kind of hummed and hawed about it, but then at the end of the day, they agreed to let us speak to their individual contacts within the diabetes insulin pump manufacturers. We had great conversations with the manufacturers, and I can't say it was just us, but I'm going to say it was a good part of just AEBC. We got several of the manufacturers to agree to look into making insulin pumps both accessible and usable. Also, we were able to deal with Abbott Industries, who has a sensor that you can do as a glucometer, and they agreed to make it a lot more accessible than it was. So there's been movements, and just recently we put in some suggestions on a standard on how to make things. I forget which the standard is now. I had it and it slipped, but a lot of the wording that we put in on suggestions to change the standard appears to be there verbatim, and all that to say, though, is you never know. We can put something in, and we don't know until it happens, and that's part of the guessing game, I guess, that I would say, is that we're going to advocate for something because we believe it's the right thing to do, and we don't know until the very end whether or not our suggestion's been heard, or when we've seen other suggestions and we've made comments on those suggestions, is it being looked at? Are we being heard? I would have to say, over the last few years, yes, we are being listened to, we're being heard. However, at the same statement, I don't know if it's the organizations or the departments are making changes. I do know that in Marcia and I, and so this is a bit old, John Ray, we went to Rogers and Sportsnet because they were big Toronto Blue Jays fans, and we couldn't get accessible or descriptive video on the Blue Jays games because they were announcing it in a manner that was just all over the place. We had some great conversations with them, and they agreed to talk to the powers that be within Sportsnet, and they changed the way they announce baseball games on TV. So we do have some impact, and it's may not be on every topic. Some of them are heavy topics, and some of them are not so heavy topics. So we do what we can do, but I would add at this point here that we're always looking for topics. So if you have an idea, let us know. We're more than happy to put it in the mix and discuss it and see what we can do with it. So I don't know if that answers your question or not, Linda.
I just like it. Yes, it does. Thank you. And I'd just like to share my experience with the bank and identifying my card. And I don't know if people are aware, but just to let folks know that CIBC provides a brailled card box board sort of sleeve that you put your card in, and that has all of the braille on it. Now, I don't know whether when I get my card replaced next year, whether it will actually have something directly on the card, but for current cards, they provide you with a sleeve. The other piece I'd like to just share is that Lee mentioned it, floating bus stops, which is a big issue for us out here in British Columbia. It's an issue that every community is going to probably have to address at some point in the not too distant future if they aren't already. And I guess one of the successes I guess I would like to share is that Vancouver, who were planning to put in a mid-block floating bus stop, and I won't get into the details, but that's a problem for us. We can't use those safely and independently. And we raised this with Vancouver, and they are now reconsidering their design to a design which will be accessible for blind persons to use that particular bus stop related to the bike lane. So it takes a lot of work to get to that point, and we all have to keep speaking up and monitoring what's happening. But we hope to see more progress in the floating bus stop issue moving
Okay.
forward.
Great. So I'm going to open it to the floor for a few minutes. Are there any questions that people have about group advocacy?
No hands up yet, but I did notice that Diana's got is unmuted, so I'm assuming, Diana, you have something to say, or you're just
I thought I muted myself again.
Yeah.
But okay. I was just going to say that I think one of the biggest issues that people have is they may have an issue themselves, but they think, oh, it's not important enough, or, it isn't something that an organization would deal with. And I think that's not necessarily true. The best way to find out is to be brave and write a little note and ask. And if it isn't something we can deal with, we would definitely, tell you or explain where you might be able to go to get it dealt with. And I was going to suggest that you give everybody the address that they can write to so that they can put in their complaints, not complaints. That's a really bad word when we're talking about advocacy.
suggestions.
Suggestions, thank you. There are requests. It could be that way too, because that would help. And also, if you sent them to the secretary mailbox, I would forward them to the advocacy committee. But Dean, can you give an address, and I will
Sure.
mute now.
So if I'm going to get it right, I hope I will. Because I'm bad with email addresses. Is advocacy at AEBC dot.
No, it's probably Blind Canadians, is it not?
No, we have
Oh.
one fixed set up, so it's advocacy at ABC. Is it
.groups.io.
Thank you. Yeah, so that one comes directly to myself and to the other co-chair, Louise. Thank you. It just, I don't know, I'm having problems with names today. Louise, and we can look at it, and then we can pass it on to the rest of the committee. But I concur with what Diana is saying, is that, if you have an issue, you're not sure, we'd be more than happy to help, and we have helped members in the past. Getting stuff ready, or and even at writing letters of support. That's we can do that, and we have done that. And there's issues that are out there, like the floating bus stops, e-scooters, and different things. And each province seems to be handling stuff a bit differently. So we've been more than happy to help. Unless somebody puts their hands up, I'm going to move to the third group, which we've already discussed a fair amount, which is the governmental legislative piece. So this is probably the biggest thing that we as a group, advocacy group, do, which takes up a lot of time. Hilton said it's a lot of fun. And it is, because we get to really review legislation, or we get to review the regulations and go through them. And there's often times where we're going through them, and a lot of people spend a lot of time putting the regulations in, but you go through them and there's no place in this regulation for in a built environment area, nothing about having an area for guide dogs to be able to relieve themselves, or nothing about having wayfinding or tactile areas or signage, so that if we get off an elevator, we can find out where we're going. And unfortunately, lots of disability groups, and we're one of them, are out of sight, out of mind. And what we've also done in this too is that as a group, we will look at stuff, and then we will also try and become part of the group that is reviewing the legislation. So we've had some success with that. Hilton's been able to get on a couple of committees. Marsh and I were able to become part of Rick Hansen in their review of the piece that they do when they go out and certify whether or not a place is accessible. And that was a lot of fun. We went through the Rick Hansen program with a fine-tooth comb, and there were lots of places where our community was not being thought of. And we brought that back to Rick Hansen, and they made adjustments. So, there's power in voice. And I think that if you have an issue and you want it addressed, we're here to address it. And if we can, we'll provide what assistance and aid we can. The big piece is that the government side of any advocacy piece takes a long time. It's not going to happen overnight, because there'll be, the legislation will come out, you get a review of the legislation, and it goes through their 3 readings from both houses, and then it will take whatever time it takes to go to royal assent. And you've had your kick at the can at that. And once that happens, then the regulations for that bill will come out. Then you're looking at, okay, do we look at it and say, yes, we need to spend some time reviewing the regulations, or we don't have the expertise to review the regulations. And sometimes, and unfortunately, that happens. As a group, we don't have the expertise to be able to get into some of the nitty-gritty pieces and regulations and say, this should be changed, or that should be changed. Most of the time.
Dean, we have one
Yeah.
hand up. We have Pat, your hand is up, and Ian, I'm assuming you didn't mean to put your hand up because I noticed you lowered it again. So I'll go to Pat first, and Ian, if you want to speak, you can speak after Pat.
I would love an opportunity. Thanks.
Sorry?
I would love that opportunity. Thank you.
Okay. So we're going to go to
Pat first, and then Ian.
Yeah. Pat and then Ian. Okay. Pat?
Okay. I think you've done a great job with governmental things. And for those of us who aren't close to the government actions that are taking place, or the different types of things that are being reviewed, can you steer us in any directions of what to look out for, so that when we are listening to the news, or watching the news and that kind of thing, that we can look out for something and say, hey Dean, hey, Hilton, what have you seen anything on this, etc.?
The quick answer to that, Pat, is that any piece of legislation, be it, and we've mostly focused on federal, but we've also done municipal and provincial pieces where, for example, in Ontario, during the last election, we sent some letters off and about the clawback pieces and what was going on with the disability. I can't remember the letter said OIDP.
ODSP?
Oh yes, OS. Yeah. So yeah. So it's open, right? I mean, if you're listening to the news and you hear that they're talking about changing the legislation on something that you believe could have an effect on you, and you need more information, you contact us and we'll look into it and say, yes, okay, we can look at it, or we can provide or try and help provide information to you so that you can do it individually, or, if you really think it's something that needs to be done by the group, then we'll do it. So we're open to any input. I can't say that, oh, you should be looking or listening to this for, XYZ type of legislation. I think it's very individual. Somebody might think, yeah, that's going to have an effect on the blind community. And whereas, if somebody's putting in legislation on changing the dimension of wheelchair ramps, I'm not sure that we would really have any good input on that, because we're not experts on wheelchair ramps. But if they were saying, oh, we're going to be taking away the wayfinding and tactile facility in an airport, for sure we would have something to do with it. So I think I would just tell you, keep your ears open. And if you think that there's a possibility that it's going to have an effect on you, and you want some help, we're there.
Well, I just feel that the advocacy committee, and as long as you've been involved, and Dean, I know you've been involved in it for years. In fact, I think I've worked with you in the past on different things.
Mm-hmm.
I just think that you're more skilled at, realizing what could be change, or when you listen to the news, I think you have a wider scope as to what to look for than what, say, I might have. I may know about, my own advocacy, and I may know, a little bit about, a very little bit about some things, but I don't catch everything. And so it really is extremely helpful for you and the committee to bring to us things that you hear rumors of being talked about or whatever, so that we are then able to open our ears and catch what's going on and bring it, not only information to ourselves, which of course is going to help us know more, but also bring it to you. And as far as wheelchair ramps, we have people who are blind and also use wheelchairs and so on and so forth. Well, is there any difference between what someone who would be just mobility disabled, as far as, using a wheelchair, and someone who is blind and having a wheelchair, and, their helper or whatever is trying to get them around and so on and so forth. So I don't think that we should be closed to those types of things. Like, for instance, even with walkers, I think that we should look at the whole gamut. But the blindness aspect and deaf blind is definitely our primary focus, but I don't think we should walk away from anything else.
Well, we don't necessarily walk away from anything else, but like I can say in for example, in the Rick Hansen Foundation, when it comes to wheelchair ramps, they have a whole process of measurement about how wide something should be or how high certain things should be. I don't think that, even I understand what you're saying, is that we should be there, but when it comes to the measurement of that and how steep the ramp should be or shouldn't be, it's up to that group, and they know better than we do. I'm not saying we shouldn't say, okay, like we can agree with them, but when it comes to some pieces of legislation, our input would be better dealt with, or be more effective concentrating on our community and what our community needs. So it's not that we're saying, oh, it's a wheelchair issue, we're out of it. It's just saying that some pieces our input wouldn't go anywhere.
Well, The aspect, if I can give you an even more concrete example, I've seen some situations where there is a ramp and you have to make a turn and then go up again and then make a turn and go up again because they haven't been able to build something straight out to the street or whatever. And, you know, is there enough room for someone who is blind and in a wheelchair and their helper to be able to negotiate that? Because it's not only the measure, maybe I don't know. I'm just throwing this out there, is that
Mhm.
it's not only measurement, but it's also, I think that we need to open our eyes and realize the fact that, you know, there are other situations that, you know, come into play.
Yeah. Well,
Anyway,
I would say that we review that, and then it goes to, with the committee, then it goes to consensus as to whether or not the issue, whatever it is, if we're looking at it, if it's something that we should do or we shouldn't do. So nothing is ever left out per se. It's just we may decide, oh, we should focus on another part of the standard because it's more appropriate for us to look at the wayfinding or tactile pieces or the way they've set the stairs up so that you can go down the stairs and know that you're on how the stairs feel or how the handrails feel versus a wheelchair ramp. So we have to sometimes pick and choose as to what we're going to comment on, but at the same point in time, you know, we have used Equalizer, we've used the emails to put information out, and we've gotten feedback from people. And at the same point, you know, we're always willing to hear from you as to what you want us to look at.
the
I'll,
last,
Yeah.
the last,
Yeah,
the
I think
last
we're
point.
okay.
The last point that I wanted to say is that the fact is that you know, we're also trying to partner with organizations now, so we need to be aware of other people's, you know, things that they will come across too.
Yep. And
Linda and I
we do
are
that.
yeah,
So
Linda and
Ian?
I are getting cognizant of time because
yeah.
we're
Okay.
And I
we've
want to
moved
give,
past
I want to give,
11:30.
yeah, I want to give Ian an opportunity to just
Yeah.
ask his last question.
Okay.
And then I think that'll be it.
Okay.
Thanks very much. It was more a point of information than a question. I was picking up on one of the speakers was talking about e-scooters as an issue. If anybody is interested, David Lepofsky, well-known lawyer and advocate for the AODA in Ontario, runs an organization called the AODA Alliance. And he runs a group that meets quite regularly with a number of stakeholders that addresses the e-scooter issue in Ontario. But the materials that he's generating, the research that he's referencing, the strategies that he's proposing might be relevant to other jurisdictions if people in other parts of Canada are worried about the e-scooter problem. He's also just an amazing resource for all kinds of advocacy with respect to disabilities. He was responsible in a large part for drafting a lot of what went into the original AODA Act, and consulted heavily on the Accessible Canada Act as well. The idea of building a network of stakeholders is actually something close to my heart. I feel that if advocacy, any of the advocacy projects that we've been talking about here today are going to move forward, it's going to rely on not a single organization's voice, but all of our voices in chorus. So the more we can build relationships with other organizations like CCB, like CNIB, like the Neil Squires Foundation, or whoever is involved in trying to move the needle for people with vision loss across Canada, I think that that might be a worthwhile endeavor. To raise AEBC's profile simply by association with other organizations might allow our voices to have more impact. And that was
And
about
I
it.
think
Thanks.
that's a great comment. Thank you, Ian, for us to end on this morning, is that, you know, we can't do it alone. We need to partner. We need to have a bigger and united voice moving forward. And I know that AEBC is working very hard towards these partnerships. And so I'd like to just thank everybody this morning for listening and for joining us, and thank Dean for his presentation, and Hilton and Lee's contribution to this morning's presentation, and contact the
So-
Advocacy Committee. Yeah, Dean, did you have a last comment? Sure, go
Yeah,
ahead.
I just wanted to say before we go, it's not just Hilton and I on the committee. I wanted to say that who else was on the committee. So there's myself, there's Louise Johnson, there's Marcia Gale, there's Lou Peru, there's Peter Quayadney, there's Wayne Antle. So it's not, as you can see, it's quite a group, and we have, as Hilton said, we have a lot of fun, but there's always room for new input. So if anybody wants to join the fun, you know, as we've said several times, that, you know, we're looking for contributors.
Thank you very much, Dean, and everybody else. Enjoy the rest of your day, and
Thank
holiday greetings to everyone.
Thank you everyone for making the
Thank
tech
you.
support so easy as well too. Thank you.
Good morning.